So the subject today that we are going to discuss is human rights education. Okay? Human rights education. This is a new course. Di ba? This is the only time that they now require under your college to have a subject on human rights education. However, the basis of this subject was given by President Corazon Aquino in July 4, 1986. He issued an Executive Order 27, Education to Maximize Respect for Human Rights. It is only now that they now integrated as one of the subjects. But this was given by an Executive Order number 27 by then President Corazon Aquino in 1986, that education to maximize respect for human rights should be integrated as a course or subject in college. Okay. That's why he said, now therefore, I, Corazon Aquino, President of the Philippines, do hereby order the Ministry of Education, Culture, and Sports shall include the study and understanding of human rights in the curricula of all levels of education, training in all schools in the country, adapting the scope and treatment of the subject or course on human rights to the respective educational level. It shall likewise initiate and maintain regular program in a special project to provide venues for information and discussion on human rights, including utilization, informal education, and other means to stress the importance of the respect thereof. The Civil Service Commission shall include the qualifying examination or government service, basic knowledge, and human rights. So they might include into your board exam this subject because it is now in the Civil Service Commission. So that's why it's only now that they have now formally included as one of the subject in your course. At present, the Department of Education, Culture, and Sports are reviewing the curricula across all levels, from the elementary, secondary, and tertiary level, to see how much human rights education is included across all these levels. The Department of Education, Culture, and Sports realized that human rights teaching and education has not given so much emphasis. The integration of the subject areas, particularly in social studies, is not enough. Thus, the Department of Education, Culture, and Sports realized that there should be a conscious effort to derive a clear direction on human rights teaching, particularly as relates to the historical evolution, that the violation of human rights and all local factors in the local context, particularly as related to our civic, social, economic, and political culture and religious rights. This is the memorandum issued by Secretary Dr. Faye Hidalgo of the Department of Education and Culture. I've given you this because this is the basis why they now include human rights in your course. Okay, so this is now the basis of the our decks to include the human rights as an education. Now, what is our reference here? Our 1987 Constitution. Okay, because the human rights is protected by Article 3 of the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights is the one that protects the human rights. Okay. Now, the human rights education, the study of the Constitution refers to the maintenance of the proper balance between authority as represented by the three inherent powers of the state and the liberty as guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. The role of the Constitution as the basic law of the land is to effect the equilibrium between the authority and the liberty so as right re-exercised within the framework of the law. The law are enacted with due reference to right. The most abused power of the state is the police power. That is the most abused. The police power that most abuse the human rights. But what is the equilibrium that would control this police power? The Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights. So, thus, to safeguard of the abuse is the Bill of Rights. That would safeguard the abuses of police power. These power and rights countercheck but are not necessarily hostile to each other. They have a common objective, coexistence. Their ultimate goal is the same. A well-ordered society based on inviolability of the rights, which although they may not be the same by what we call, although they may not be curtailed arbitrarily, may nevertheless be regarded or regulated for the common good. So, this is the purpose here, why human rights are abused, because police power. And who is going to exercise this police power? The government, the authorities. Now, who will equalize this is the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. That's why I said you have to go over the Bill of Rights. There are almost section 1 to 21 sections. Okay. Now, let us therefore proceed to the examination of the different provisions of Article 3. So, I give you that I am looking for the Constitution, but these are what we call the Bill of Rights. What the Constitution, the body of rules and maxims in accordance with the power of the sovereign and habituality. The written instrument enacted by direct action of the people by which the fundamental power of the government are established, limited and defined, and by which these powers are exercised. Okay. The law and protection of human rights are indivisible. Okay. These are some of the characteristics of our, what we call the human rights. They are indivisible. The law ensures the human rights are not violated, and the foundation of laws is human rights. The principle that govern the execution of the law safeguard the universal value of man's freedom and his basic rights as an individual in a continuing pursuit of justice. Human rights are for everyone. So human rights is indivisible. Human rights is for everyone. Whether one is a woman, whether he's a man, young and old, rich or poor, urbanite or from countryside, landless or landless, school or uneducated in life, gray or straight, everyone has the right to which one has to struggle in order to employ them. Well, try to look at the activists. Every day they struggle for human rights, di ba? Ngayon na naman, they are now looking for the human rights of that one arrested in Cagayan. Ano ba ito, yung babae may 1-year-old anak? As an NPA. Now, the question that we are now talking today of the activists is the tagging. Is that a violation of human rights? Yung tagging, di ba? Yung minomonitor yung mga leftists. Tagging. This is a question if I'm going to ask you in the examination, what is your opinion on the tagging? Is it a human rights violation or not? And this is where we can see how you, as far as you can reason out whether it's a violation or not. Okay. Human rights are not and cannot be neutral. You cannot say that human rights should be neutral. Okay? To take a stand for human rights means to take a stand in favor of human rights, human beings, especially those who fall victim to the injustice and oppression. This is one of the reasons for which human rights position is a political one. You cannot just say, I am neutral. That's why you find it out in the House of Senate. there are 4 or 5 senators who made a resolution for the release of that Amanda, yung bagong release. And these are, sino ba ito? Franklin Deron, ito ba yung Secretary of Justice na nakulong ng babae? De Lima, ito. Franklin Deron, ito ba Pangilinan. These are the senators who made a resolution that this woman who is newly arrested because of violations of illegal possession of firearm should be released. Now, what is their basis? Human rights. Human rights is their basis. So, ang kinawawa dyan, hindi na yung bata, yung 1 month old. Now, so, this senator did not took a neutral one. They took a stand. Okay? That's why human rights is not a neutral. Okay? Human rights are not, cannot be neutral. Soon as this situation, social stratification lead to one inequality, injustice, and oppression, social cleavage become the order of civilization. A few own of wealth of the whole kingdom of the countries, while the many live under harsh condition, poverty, and have toil. Monarchy, aristocracy, oligarchy, dictatorship engaged in the form of rule. Yes, this is inequality, injustice, and oppression, social cleavage. Some are rich, some are too poor. Diba? And that is why the objective of the human rights should be all in more or less an equal level. Economic, political, and cultural hegemony of the power replaced the indigenous lifestyle of the people. Slaves have become under the tyranny of the Pharaoh. Well, I will explain this when we go to history, the history of the human rights. Okay? Now, in our Philippine situation, I will go this after I go to the... Let us look at the history of human rights. During the primitive communal system, tribal system in the Philippines, so members of the tribe banding themselves together for the main purpose of survival. There were no state during those times. There was no only society, and there was no concept of human right as right belongs to an individual. During the tribal system, di ba? There is no so much violation of human rights because they are what we call, they are banding themselves together for the main purpose of survival. During the early days, we call that the primitive communal system. Now, after that, it developed to history when there are slavery. This was a time when the state was introduced. When there is a state already, they are now introducing a government of state. This was an instrument invented by power holders in order to perpetuate themselves in power. The existence of a class domination against other class. Thus, the presence of unequal relation of people living in a society. The master claimed that they have the right to do so. They please while the slave had none. Okay? So, the masters claim that they have, but the slaves has no human rights. That's why they can sell. If you look into the history, slaves are being sold from one to the other because they are like commodities, as if they do not have human rights. During the slavery. After the slavery, we come up to the feudalism. Feudalism rights here are no longer monopoly of a small group. All the kings and the emperor, datus were all powerful. The head, the kings, the datus, these are now the powerful. They claim that they have the direct mandate from heaven. This was the absolute power of monarchy. The king is the justification of having divine rights. Human rights are now monopoly of the vassal lords. The king granted these rights as to the expense of the patient. Today there is still monarchs, but they are now called the constitutional monarchies. You remember when president accused the monarchs, yung mga mamayaman. Okay. Now, because of this feudalism, this head of the state now control, as if they have now direct from heaven the rights. So they control the what we call the governing the state, the monopoly of the vassal lords, the peasants, the farmers, the poor one. Now after that, we come up to the capitalism. Capitalism now, this rise with a new economic philosophy, though the political thought in age of expansion, mercantilism, and shortly of free trade brought the new philosophy. Competition leads to a more production of goods, service, and thus generate more profit. This was a period of individual. It also revolved to a new class, bourgeois, who hampered from amassing more wealth for a morbid feudal. So when there was a capitalism, at least there are some people now engaged in a trade. But there is still what we call the bourgeois. We have still bourgeois today. Remember the bourgeois, the owner of the Philippine Airline, diba? Ikawankos, these are bourgeois people. If you go to the United States, the Bill Gates, diba? Bill Gates is the one controlling now the pandemic, the millionaire. That's why Trump lost, because most of these bullies in the United States now go to the new president because of this trade. Kasi si Trump may tupak-tupak din, parang Duterte yan, may tupak-tupak. Lalo na kung lasing. Let's go. Look at history now. Each period has its own bias. Human rights have always been controlled by one sector. It has never been freely enjoyed by everyone. But the concept of human rights has constantly been changing, if only to suit the interests of the class in power to suppress, control the mass. Claims that human rights is democracy and democracy is capitalism is an example of human rights being viewed as absolute. Human rights change always, and they form part of the struggle of the people. Human rights is an absolute. And in human rights is a continuing struggle of the people. Okay? So it is a continuing struggle. Everybody talks of human rights. If these were to everybody, but these were in truth beyond only those who held power. The women in particular were even more suppressed than men. It was only a long struggle of the women were recognized, given in their rights. Remember, before, does a woman have a human rights? None. That's why in the contract of marriage, parang the wife is to serve the husband. Diba? But today, because of this struggle of women's rights, now, women are equal in opportunity of employment. This is now the struggle of the women liberations today. They are now equal with men. Okay? That's why they have now the first woman vice president in the United States. We had the first woman president in the Philippines, Gloria Macapagal. In employment and opportunities, equal. Like in the police now, di ba? Marami ng mga babae. The PNP chief is now putting women as provincial heads, di ba? That is now his objective. So that's why women now are liberalized. Okay. Let me go to the Philippine context. A special formation is that neo-colonial society that has perpetuated its precisely producing conditions. Well, this is what we call the Philippine conditions, the historical development of the divine rights. Let us look the evolution of philosophy of human rights. Historically, human rights have never been absolute. Human rights are relative as to who says it, who controls, and who performs the function of the government. Do we look human rights as being mandated by law, as alleged that we have inherent rights, or do we put to test this claim inherent rights? These are two ways in how to view human rights. One, human rights as absolute. It maintains that human rights never change in form and context. It is inherent to us. It never changes, and everyone possesses human rights. Second, everyone is guaranteed his human rights in the Constitution and laws. These views is also follows with reality practically and reality. History has understand several. Okay. So, this, in our Philippine context, at least we have now the, what we call the Constitution that now balance the police power. Okay. So, one that promotes our human rights that was drafted by the Philippine Declaration of Human Rights Power, rights held on December 10, 1990. This is a human rights declaration made. Okay. The Filipino people stands at the turning point of the Philippine history as national crisis near its critical moment. We are faced with the choice between the slow death offered by failing neo-colonial system and option of engage in full-scale struggle for national and social liberation. National and social liberation remain in clarion call of the Filipino people. It is a clarion call to all the Filipino people of these human rights. We support and adopt the Philippine Declaration of Human and People's Rights and proclaim the legitimacy of the people's struggle for national and social liberation. Let me go the content of this draft Declaration of Human Rights. Okay. I have that book, but too long. I just only got the sections. The first section is the basic principle on the neo-derogable rights. Okay. That human rights is absolute. Okay. Human rights is inherent, as said by the basic principle in Section 1. Section 2, right to existence. So everybody has the right to life, right to existence. That's why in that abortion law, di ba? They said that that is a violation of the human rights. But they have come up to that, what is that law that in relation to the abortion? When does life begin? But when there is life, and you kill that life, that is a violation on right to existence. Right to human. Right to environment. What are the rights to environment? Well, we have now this problem on the rights of environment. Floods. Cagayan Valley. Other places are being flooded. What is the source and the problem? The violation of human rights of environment. Cutting trees, illegal logging. Dams are being diverted. And these are supposed to be looked at under our Philippine Declaration on Human Rights. Ito yung DNR. Sabi ng isang comment sa radio is, mga DNR, you have planted trees. Where are the trees? Okay. What's the definition of the DENR? Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Wrong. What's the real? Destroy everything and never reforest. That is DNR. I'm teaching you not to be an activist, but these are, you see. No, right to environment, right to social rights. Social rights. Whether you are black, whether you are white, you're equal. Whether you are Filipino, whether you are foreign. Whether you're poor, whether you're rich, we are all equal in social rights. This is a declaration. Civil and political rights. Civil, we have equal opportunity on appointments. Civil rights, equal opportunity to all. Political rights, we have all equal rights to choose our political leaders. Political rights, the right to suffrage, these are governed by political rights. Civil rights, these are owned by civil rights on opportunities. We are talking of economic rights. You have the right to become rich. Di ba? Free trade. Economic rights. Free trade. Cultural rights. Yes, you have the right to promote your cultures. And they are now, the tourism are now moving into developing the cultural, reviving the cultures of the Filipino people. The cultural rights. You have the rights. Okay? We have these different indigenous people rights, di ba? What is that law that govern the NCIP, di ba? The indigenous rights. Well, I have been reading that indigenous rights. Well, the law is there, but it has no teeth. Walang ngipin. It cannot bite. There is no budget. So you cannot implement. You cannot implement these indigenous rights, the cultural rights, women rights. Oh yes, women rights. But I've said today, it is all now equal, di ba? Opportunities in all. Children's rights. What are the rights of the children? Right to education, right to a decent living, di ba? These are being mentioned there in that section on rights of the children. And rights of the children during, in terms of war, that they should be protected. Okay. Oh, well, here is the indigenous people's right. Indigenous people's right. Political and prisoners' right. Oh yes, ito yung political rights, prisoners, to be free. Right in the situation of internal armed conflict. During armed conflict, people, civilians should be evacuated. These are rights, guaranteed injunctions. These are what we call, these are the rights that are taken in our Philippine Declaration. Now we have the International Declaration of Rights also, which should be observed. Well, I have the draft Philippine Declaration of Human Rights, which I have just mentioned to you. Okay? They are here, but, well, I don't know if they are really being implemented. Okay. Some are. We have this theory and practice of human rights in the Philippines. It was in 1986, the Philippine Constitution where promote the protection of human rights was mentioned. Most Filipinos, however, were already aware of the basic constitutional guarantees mentioned in the Bill of Rights, starting from the old laws, President McKinley, then it was drafted in the Philippine Autonomy Act, the Jones Law, the Tiding-McDuffie Law, the 1935, Constitution 1973. But it is now, all of them are now integrated in the 1987 Philippine Constitution. Okay. So, human rights are inherent, as I've said. They are not granted by any authority. There is no need of happening of event for their existence. Human rights are distinguished from legal or constitutional rights, which are promulgated by the state. Human rights are inherent because they belong to an individual merely as human being. This is the characteristic of human rights. They are inherent. Another one is human rights is inalienable because they cannot be rightfully taken away from an individual. Inalienable. Third characteristic is human rights are imprescriptible because they cannot be lost even by long passage of time. They cannot prescribe. Human rights does not prescribe. And the fourth characteristic is human rights are indivisible because they are not capable of being divided. You cannot divide human rights. Indivisible. The fourth is human rights is universal because they are enjoyed by every human being, irrespective of origin, status, or condition, place where they live. It is universal. And the last is human rights is interdependent because they fulfill or exercise of one cannot be had without realization of another. So, the characteristic here of human rights is inherent, fundamental, inalienable, imprescriptible, indivisible, universal, and interdependent. So, human rights become international concern and now subject to international law. So, the origin of international concern over human rights, the international protection of human rights international law, legal and political issues. We have the international human rights, which Philippines is a signatory. Okay? Signatory. Now, we have the equality is one of the bases of principle of human rights, equality. We have one of the worst, what we call, violation of human rights in our country today is the commercialization of sexual exploitation of children. Diba? That's one, violations of the human rights. Now, we have also this status of human rights in the Philippines. Historically, the Filipino people had several experiences of violation of human rights from the colonial Spanish regime when was economic and classic discrimination. You know, sometimes even you do not want to buy Philippine product, di ba? You want an imported. This is what we call on the economic rights, di ba? That's why there are some that buy Filipino product. But buy Filipino, buy Chinese. Mas mahal, mas mura, pero madaling masira, di ba? Pero these are on economic rights. Now, the one that the Filipino have already also signed is when the Philippines voted to admit in the Asian of the what we call the human rights in the Asian. They are also a signatory. Okay. The Commission on Human Rights had intervened in a petition filed with the Supreme Court on the case of Leo Echegaray. You remember this? Who was the last victim of the death in the death penalty during the time of Estrada, Cheragay. And so there were petitions on on human rights, on violations of life, that they said no person can take life except God. That is what in their petitions in this Leo Cheragay, a convicted whose death sentence was affirmed to declare the death penalty under RA 7659. Okay. We have the I have said the commercial exploitations of children. We have another human rights, the internal displacement of families. The displacement of families. The armed conflict. Now, another common discrimination, human rights in the Philippines is discrimination. Okay? Discriminations. Right in the countries on discrimination. Some people are being discriminated because of their status in life. Okay? Nowadays, you try, if you are a positive with COVID, are you accepted in that offices? No. You are not allowed to enter, di ba? That is discrimination. Huh? You are now not allowed. Now we have the political and, prisoners to be freed. Human rights laws, new area on practice of law. We have the human rights violation on non-criminal offences. When I'm talking of these non-criminal offences, these are violations on the civil code. The human rights now, Commission on Human Rights. So, this, I have made this article. This is my, before these are, what year is this? These are magazines long time before. But these are journal magazines which, until today, I have Xerox the declaration of the Philippine Declaration on Human Rights, which I have given to the Dean. If you want to avail, you can Xerox it, di ba? Now, under this, I have made some questions, aside from the assignment that I have made you to make it, like what's the basic of neo-derogable rights, right to existence, the questions here. Enumerate the Bill of Rights, define Constitution, police power. Well, these are what we call you just submit, the rights RA 7438. This includes prisoners, di ba? The right of the prisoners under the President Mandela human rights. They adopted this RA 7438 under the Mandela human rights on prisoners because President Mandela was then in prison. Mandela. So they have made that. So they adopted what we call the rights of persons under RA 1738. You just press it in your Google, it will come out. Now, you answer this, and my questions, I have made the final exams 1 to 20. And I have explain basic principle of human rights in the concept of discrimination. Well, what is the human rights in the concept of discrimination? When you discriminate people of their right to employment, di ba? Minsan nga ay hindi ka pwede kasi igorot ka, di ba? Hindi ka pwede kasi you are not from this town. These are discrimination. They will not give you ayuda because you are not a registered voter here. Di ba? Yan ang mga violations. You are not a registered voter of that barangay, so they do not give you ayuda. These are what we call discriminations. You just give examples here. Against women under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the exploitations. What is racial discrimination? Black and white, di ba? You are discriminated because you are from a minority culture. These are examples. I just give you what is racial, discriminations of race. Now, I have given you here, what do you think the most common violation of human rights under the present administration? Okay? Some Some of the assignment that I have taken is that equal opportunity to employment. Well, that's one. And then some people here is the killing and on the drugs. Well, that is one. And this is what human rights are running after. A common violations of the police power on the killing of drugs involved. So these are, well, I'm not specific, but how do you find it out and how you say that that is a violation of human rights? Yeah? There are many violations of human rights that we have in the Philippines. Even in schools, di ba? Even in schools, tuition fees. Pero hindi ako magtuturo yan kasi yan ang expert ko when I was in the college. I've been suspended because I've been the leader of strikes in Baguio City. I'm the president of the BBAC in the St. Louis University. And I lead the strike for almost 2 weeks because of tuition fees. And because the Cordillerans are not given a special treatment. Yeah. Even when I am a teacher in UB, I am the advisor of the Supreme Student Council. They go for a strike. I was suspended. Yeah. Kaya nga, ito, sabi ko ngayon din, binigay mo ito, baka kung sa regular lectures, sa classroom, maging activist sa lahat ng estudyante ko. Because I will open all my handouts. Nandyan pa sa kwarto ko yung mga, I just pick up some of the historical backgrounds. I have that book, That Truth, that black book, Truth, that covers all the human and international rights. Dito ko kinuha. I have that book. You cannot find that book in anyone. But I got that book in the mountain. Sa bundok ko kinuha yan. When I was then in the mountain. Pero hindi ko kasama si Amanda. Hindi ko kasama yan. So, this is one thing that I ask you, my students in human rights, everywhere in your corner, there are violations because of abuse of police power, abuse of authorities. But we are guaranteed by our Bill of Rights. Okay, due process of law. These are things in the Bill of Rights. That's why I made you in your assignment here to write the Bill of Rights section. Okay. Yan, kahit na yan lang ang alam mo, yung mga section 1 to 21 ng Bill of Rights. These are the rights that will protect our violation of human rights. With this, okay, there are many really have not passed their assignments in our human rights. Okay, tapos na ito. But there are many who are enrolled also in human rights. And konti ang nagpapas. Very few who pass their